Wide Angle Conversations, an initiative of Life by Design. Because stories are powerful, capable of igniting change and enabling success in others. This is Season 4, and I am your host, Taruna Aggarwal. My guest today is Rachele Focardi. She is a global thought leader and well-renowned public speaker on multi-generational workforce dynamics, future of work, employer branding, and talent strategy. She is the chair of Multigenerational Workforce Committee for the ASEAN Human Development Organization and the founder of XYZ at Work. She has recently authored a book, Reframing Generational Stereotypes, that was launched in December 2020. Hi, Rachele. Welcome to Wide Angle Conversations.
Hi, Taruna. Thank you for having me.
Rachele, today your work is focused on bringing generational diversity as a key item in the D&I agenda for organizations. What makes generational diversity and inclusion important to you?
Well, what makes generational diversity and inclusion important to me is that I myself, as a Gen Xer, when I exited the university and joined the workforce, was a victim of this kind of old mindset of, young talent entering the workforce, not being worth much, not having anything important to say, not being worth listening to. And I think obviously what has been happening in the world over the last 10, 15 years has proved that young people do have a lot of things to say and they can contribute and they should contribute. So I feel very passionate about being able to bridge this gap within the workplace to make sure that organizations are able to fully leverage on the ambition, the social mindedness, the drive, the vision of young generations, but at the same time make sure that the older generations that are currently in the workplace are able to fully enable them, empower them, and kind of pass down that knowledge and experience, and together really kind of address some of the big changes and challenges that our world is facing right now.
That's right. And today, as you are saying, we are living in very interesting times. We have the baby boomers, the Gen X, the Y and Z all coming together in the workforce. So what kind of corporate dynamics has this multi-generational spread created?
Well, yes, you said right. We have 4 generations now, and I think it's the first time in history that you have so many generations working alongside each other. And in some cases, it's even 5. We see more and more traditionalists that are actually still in the workplace. And what this is causing is a lot of tension. I think if we go back to what started this tension in the workplace, as I said, is, prior to millennials, the general consensus was that, a young talent would come into the workplace. They would have to listen to their managers. They would have to do work that they weren't necessarily expected to like. They would have to work on menial tasks. And all of a sudden, this new generation, the millennials in 2005, 2006, rose. And especially as a result of 2008 and seeing their parents kind of lose all their retirements, put life on hold, until retirement, and then never be able to really do that. They kind of stood up and decided that young people were worth listening to, that work should be part of who they are and not just a way to make a living, that managers should not be scary people whose shoes you'll never be able to fill, but they should be people that you can relate to and that can help you grow and mentor you and identify and kind of bring out your potential. And they decided that they wanted to be appreciated for their diversity and have flexible conditions. And what was interesting at the time is that McKinsey had just talked about the war for talent as a strategic business imperative for companies. So what happened is that organizations across the world found themselves dealing with an entire new generation that wanted things to be very different. Having a strong brand, having prestige, offering high salaries was no longer enough. And so companies really started to try and change. And we've seen this with the workplace revolution that I think we are all benefiting with right now. I mean, workplace is very different today than what it was 15 years ago. But I think in an effort to create the perfect environment for this generation, organizations failed to kind of create some cross-generational awareness, where the young generations would understand the concept, the past, the forces, and the context
Mm.
of the people that were currently in the workplace, and at the same time, the people that were currently in the workplace, to understand, why this generation is so important, why it's important that we
Mm.
actually help them and support them. And so this created a lot of rifts, and all of a sudden you have Gen Z, now
Yeah.
an entire new generation coming into the workplace, and they demand even more change.
Mm.
So it's really important that organizations understand how to leverage on the strengths of all these generations to make the world a better place.
That's right. And so, how is your work in helping the organizations to kind of come to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot that organizations need to do. I have been in this space for almost 18 years,
Mm-hmm.
and what actually has driven me to, write this book and focus more intensely on this topic is, as I said, Gen Z is coming into the workplace, and like millennials, they
Mm-hmm.
demand change. But the change that they demand is not related to the work environment,
Yeah.
but it's more related to purpose and impact. So
Mm.
every time I talk to these young individuals, and these young students, I'm blown away by how committed they are to social causes, how much they want to be able to join
Mm.
organizations and immediately drive change, work on projects that are impactful. And they really hold companies accountable towards, sustainable practice and ethical practices and so on and so forth. So they really see organizations as the pathway
Mm.
to be able to change the world. And they will hold corporations accountable. The problem, though, is that if these kind of generational diatribes that
Mm-hmm.
currently exist in the workplace are not addressed,
Mm.
this generation will come in full of drive and full of desire to drive change, and they will soon after leave.
Right.
There is a lot of tension in terms of different in mindsets. I found that 1 in 2 people who leave an organization, especially young ones,
Mm.
they leave because they feel that they are not getting along with their managers, and it's usually caused by generational differences.
Mm.
So you'll have the managers say that the young generations are entitled, or they want to be promoted too quickly, or don't know hardship,
Mm.
or have too much ambition. And on the other hand, you have the new generations feeling that I cannot drive change because my
Yes.
manager is resistant to change or more traditional and
Mm.
conservative in their mindset. So without being able to bring them together, it will be very, very different for companies to be able to drive innovation.
Right. So, how do you suggest we bring them together and bridge these gaps that are there?
Well, the very first step is to create cross-generational understanding. I
Mm.
always get mind blown by how little generations really
Yeah.
understand about one another. I think we live in an interesting time. Organizations are shying away from generational diversity because they're afraid. They're afraid
Mm.
of addressing the topic because they're afraid of insulting people, very much like sexual orientation or ethnical diversity a few years ago. It's a topic that is still almost seen as a taboo. And I think this needs to change.
Mm.
I've heard so many people say that generational differences are not real, that generations don't actually exist, that we shouldn't be bunched under a generational
Mm.
umbrella. But the reality is that the context that we were brought up in, the forces, the economical forces, political forces, cultural, pop culture that existed when each of us entered adulthood and entered the workplace
Right.
really have defined us. And I think it's time companies start addressing this. In all of the research that I've done over the
Mm-hmm.
years, there is very little that generations understand of one another. When I talk to an entry level talent or a Gen
Yeah.
Z, and I say, do you have any idea that when my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, when I entered the workforce,
Mm.
I wasn't even allowed to ask companies how many days I would get vacation because they
Right.
would think I was lazy. I wasn't allowed to, join important meetings. I wasn't allowed to speak up. I wasn't allowed to have demands in terms of what my working day-to-day working experience would be. I kind of just had to take it, and I could expect maybe 10 years to go by before I got a significant promotion.
Mm.
And these young kids, they look at me and they can't believe it. And the reality is that if they don't understand that, when they
Yeah.
join the workforce and they encounter someone like me who was trained to not be as authentic, to keep the private private and the personal and the business business, automatically they're going to think that, look at her, she's self-important, she doesn't want me to
Yeah.
grow. And instead, if they were to just understand that that is the context I was brought up in,
Yeah.
I think there would be a lot more understanding. And likewise, I think my generation and baby boomers, they need to understand the immense amount of pressure that these young generations are in right now. I mean, they literally don't know whether there's going to be a world ready to welcome their children in 20 years.
True, true that.
And they feel the need to drive this change. So the first step that companies need to take is to stop hiding their head in the sand and start addressing this topic.
Right.
There's a lot of positives that come from being a baby boomer or being a millennial or a Gen X or a Gen Z. And I think it's about time that we kind of help the workforce understand each other
Yeah.
and also understand what are our strengths and how can we capitalize on those strengths to work together for the common good.
Great. And that would be the ideal world, right? Where the generations are interacting beautifully with each other, understanding each other, and bringing their whole selves to the organization.
Absolutely. I mean, we live in a very, very interesting times. I mean, we've seen it right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, how interconnected and interdependent we all are. And it's interesting because while all these challenges that our world is facing right now should be bringing us closer together, I think we're very polarized. And you see that in the workplace with, new age mindset and traditional mindset, with liberal and conservative, with, technology and traditional ways of doing things. But the reality, and my opinion, and I really strongly believe this, is that the secret to saving the world is really to look at how we can combine our strengths and work together. And we cannot do that if we don't kind of get rid of this concept of hierarchy and we start to listen at each other and leverage on each other's strengths.
Yeah, we really need to leverage on our strengths, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you, Rachele. That was lovely talking to you. Thanks for sharing all those insights on a topic that is not really spoken much about.
Absolutely.
And I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was Rachele Focardi talking to us about multi-generational inclusion in the workplace. We'll see you next week with another meaningful conversation. Until then, bye-bye.